Hello there, I'm Larry Short. This is MushroomObsession.com. Welcome to another blog. We're talking about chanterelles, golden chanterelles, which are common up here in Washington State, and we are going to show you in another blog how to hunt them out in the forest. They don't grow domestically. You can buy them in the stores, but all the ones you get have been picked wild. They've been collected from out in the forest. So this is my kitchen. Welcome to it. And nothing fancy, but it's great for preparing mushrooms. And today we're going to let you in on a little bit of a test. We're going to do a test with chanterelles on how to store them. And I'm going to tell you three different ways that are potential ways to store chanterelle mushrooms and the benefits and drawbacks of each method. So the primary way that I use to store chanterelles is to cook them first, saute them, what's called dry sauteing. And we'll talk about that in another video, and we'll actually show the process of dry sauteing some chanterelles. But what you do is you basically cut them up, quarter them, depending on the size that you like to eat, and you throw them in a pan. Cast iron skillet works best. Nice and hot, medium hot pan. And you dry saute them, you use a wooden spoon, you stir them in that pan, and they will start to leach liquid. A large percentage of mushrooms are water. And the water, as you heat them up, at least for chanterelles, will come out of the mushroom and will begin to bubble off, boil off from the bottom of the pan. You want to leach all that liquid you can out of mushroom. And as you're cooking a chanterelle mushroom, it goes through a life cycle of sorts where it loses all its fluid, and that fluid hopefully boils off, and then it starts to suck in other fluids around it. And so at the point the water boils off, and it's nice and hot, so you've killed all those germs in your wild mushrooms, you then will add some things in there that will add flavor to the mushrooms or complement the flavor of the mushrooms. And depending on how sweet you like it, chanterelle is a very sweet mushroom, kind of peachy flavor. One of my favorite recipes is to add a touch of salt and some whole peppercorns and some sweet sherry or port, and it will soak up the flavor of that sherry or port, boil off the alcohol, but you'll have great tasting mushrooms shortly after that. And we'll talk about those recipes. I've got a recipe out there for more savory chanterelles called Chanterelles Shazam on allrecipes.com. You can get the instructions and the ingredients there, and basically it uses shallots, garlic, and a little bit more savory ingredients to make it a little less of a sweet mixture. So, and white wine, there's some different things you can do to kind of give it different subtle flavors. So one of the ways great way to store chanterelles is simply to make your chanterelle Shazam or whatever dry sauteed chanterelle mixture you desire, and put it in bags. After you're done, let it cool. Put it in Ziploc bags, label it, throw it in the freezer, and then you can pull it out anytime during the year when you want to eat mushrooms, and thaw those bags, heat them up in the microwave, stir them in with other dishes, or use them as a side dish, whatever you want to do. Throughout the year you can use those mushrooms. That's way number one, and that's the one I've had the best success at. Mushrooms always taste best fresh. So the best way to use these mushrooms is to hunt them, prepare them, eat them on the spot. Second best is to prepare them and then freeze them, in my opinion. There are two other ways that we're going to explore today, and we're going to explore we're going to find out, we're going to do a little test and find out which way seems to work best. So we dehydrate a lot of mushrooms. A lot of mushrooms dehydrate really well. Lobsters dehydrate really well. And morels, probably the world's finest mushroom, which is a spring mushroom, which we get around eastern Washington in the spring, those dehydrate exceptionally well, and they will rehydrate, they'll take up the moisture, and you'll basically be right back where you started with a great tasting mushroom. That's one of the advantages of morels, and one of the reasons they're so expensive to purchase. And often you'll see dehydrated morels for a little 3-ounce baggie. It's like $12 or more for a 3-ounce bag of dehydrated morels, which may turn into half pound or something like that as you rehydrate them. So not a lot of mushroom for your buck, but they're great tasting mushrooms. So if you have never tried it, I'd recommend going ahead and buying a dehydrated bag, rehydrate them, and try it. But just like any fruit or vegetable, same is true with the mushroom, they're best fresh. So if you haven't had a fresh picked morel, you've really missed out on a treat. They're great. But today we're going to do chanterelles. It's a fall mushroom. It's early September here in the Pacific Northwest, and there's two methods we're going to test for preserving the chanterelle mushrooms that you pick. So I've got a container here of whole chanterelle mushrooms. This is about the biggest one in here. mushrooms we picked yesterday, some were several times that size. We took all the great big ones last night, chopped them up, sauteed them, and ate them with dinner. So I can't even show you those. We ate a lot of them. But here is about half of the smaller mushrooms that we picked yesterday. I've cleaned them off, and I showed you how to do that in a previous video. And the first method we're going to test today is one I just read about. I've never tried yet. And it's basically freezing whole mushrooms into a block of ice. So what I've done is I've taken a couple of containers, just plastic containers like this, no lids, and I poured clean fresh water into them. I put them in the freezer until they were just partially frozen, pulled them out, kind of broke the ice apart. So they're nice and cold, and I think the object here is to get the water as cold as possible before you immerse the mushrooms into it. So we're gonna take those whole mushrooms and we're just gonna plop them into each of these half-filled containers of water and make sure they're fully submerged. We'll do a bunch in each so that we about fill up the container. And some of these pieces have broken and whatnot, and I'm sure that's probably okay. The issue is you want to get them under the water as much as possible. So I'm told that if you freeze chanterelles just by themselves, they'll freezer burn really easily because of the moisture that's in them. And so the name of the game is to get them as much as possible under the water, which will prevent oxygen from getting to them, which will prevent freezer burn. So I've done it here with this one. We've still got about an inch on the top, so I'm going to add some water to it over here at my faucet. Sorry, I don't have a photographer, so you've got me. So adding some water. Make sure that they're nice and down. I'll put a lid on this just to keep them down. And since it's a plastic container and there's about a half-inch air gap there, it will have some room to expand and it won't hopefully break my plastic container. And I'll leave it loose as well so that the expansion has a way of escape. And then I'll put it in the freezer. And we're going to freeze them solid. So I've got enough mushrooms for 2 containers. Got slightly different sizes I'm going to test. I've got a square one here. I'm going to add mushrooms to it as well. And we'll go through the same process basically. Stuff them in there. I've read some people actually do 1 mushroom per block of ice. That seems like a lot of trouble for me to just have 1 mushroom in a block of ice. So I'm obviously doing more than 1. And I'm doing probably ½ pound of mushrooms per container. Okay, I've got about an inch or so air gap on top of there. I'm going to fill that up with water. I'm going to loosely attach the lid to that, not all the way down, so that it has room to expand. Alright, so there's my lid. Just partially attached, and I'm going to put it in the freezer. And we'll find out tomorrow. Well, actually probably wait a week or so and give it time to sit and make sure it doesn't freezer burn and whatnot. How that turns out. We'll compare it with the next method we're going to try, which is dehydration. So I've read that some people do dehydrate chanterelles, but that it doesn't work very well necessarily. I have a very simple but effective dehydrating machine here that I picked up from a yard sale, and it's like $2 or something. It was used. It's got a series of these racks, 4 of them that fit down in this. I'll tilt the camera down so you can see the machine. This square dehydrator. Let's see. Let me put that camera down a little bit. There we go. You can see it there, hopefully. So what we're going to do is we're going to just. Actually, I'm not going to necessarily use my whole. I'll do some. I'll do 1 rack of whole chanterelles. I also have a bag of cut-up chanterelles. I'm going to try 2 different methods here to see which one works better. You want to leave just a sufficient amount of space as you're doing this between them. Actually, I should probably just dump it all on there. Drop 1 mushroom on the floor. Don't want to waste the mushrooms. These are great mushrooms. We will cook them later, so I don't really care about the floor. No 5-second rule there. So I've got all my mushrooms kind of spread out here on the sheet. They take a lot of height, and so I can't do all 4, especially this one takes. This is a big mushroom. I'm going to break it in half, I think. All right. So there we go. There's some mushrooms. Just make sure they're spread apart. We'll put those on the bottom of the dehydrator. Right there like so. I also have a bag of mushrooms which I prepared last night, of chanterelles. Chanterelles store best in the refrigerator in a paper bag because you want it to be able to breathe, and you can only store them for so long. Obviously, you're going to have problems with mold and stuff like that if you leave them for too long. But you can store them for a little while, and I stored it overnight in this brown bag. And I'm going to dump, I basically quartered these, most of them. Smaller ones I've left intact, but the larger ones are in pieces. About enough for another tray here. And we're going to attempt to dehydrate these chanterelles here, and then we're going to come back, we'll try rehydrating them and see how they do. They will really, I can guarantee you they'll shrink down in size because as I mentioned, chanterelles are probably at least 75-80% water, so they'll be much smaller when we check out the results later. I'll put them in my dehydrator on top of the other tray like that in the number 3 slot, so each has got room to breathe. I'll put the cover on my dehydrator, and I will set it. There's got a number of settings. It doesn't have any settings for mushrooms, so I'm assuming the setting somewhere between vegetables and fruits and leathers is correct. Vegetables is 125 degrees, fruits and leathers is 135. So I'm going to set it for 130 degrees right in between the two. I'm going to turn the dehydrator on, and it's blowing warm, dry air through that. And by this time tomorrow, we'll have dehydrated mushrooms. I'll check back with you then, and we'll take a look. We'll store those when they're done, completely dehydrated. If they're thoroughly dehydrated, probably the best way is to store them in a baggie, a plastic baggie, so no moisture gets into them. So we'll check back with you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Happy shrooming.